Okay. And start. There we go. All right. So for today's discussion, Camden, I thought we'd talk more about leadership and specifically leadership because, here's why I find it interesting. And it's not just because I've been doing it my entire life, but I have people come up to me probably over the last 5 to maybe even longer than that, but several years, we'll just call it several years, that say, hey, how do you lead millennials? And it just, I just kind of, I look at them and I'm like, well, what do you mean? How do I lead millennials? How do you lead millennials? And it's like, it's the same thing, that there's no difference. I mean, I kind of go back to it's fundamentals. And that's why, I called this podcast, Leadership is Leadership, right? Because if you do the foundational, the fundamentals, the basics, right, then guess what? You can lead anybody, anywhere, to do anything. It's not, I have to throw out all my leadership lessons because now I've got a 25-year-old in my team or a 65-year-old on my team. Leadership is leadership.
Yes, sir. And I think you're right. Leadership is leadership. And a lot of that is because leadership itself is so broad. You can apply leadership to anything. It's just working with people. It's management. It's coaching. All of those things just tie together. Because leadership is so broad like that, you can apply it to really anything. It's just the same type of things. You just tailor it to your own situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I always go back to is what are those foundational pieces? How do you describe a leader? How do you describe that person that you look at and say, wow, that guy, that gal is a great leader? And sometimes, well, a lot of times people don't think about that until you start to ask them, well, name a great leader. Name somebody that you believe is a good leader. And then once you start doing that and you break that down, you can start to bring out, what are those principles? What are the top 5 characteristics or foundational principles, however you want to label it, that describe what a great leader is? I don't know if you've given any thought to what your 5 are. I mean, I've got my 5 that I've stuck with for a number of years.
So I definitely don't have a hard 5, but I have a really good story for that. Professor of mine, great professor here at U of A, Dr. Torres, took a class of his on leadership and management. And one of the things that he started off with was, just like you, what is a leader? How do you know a leader? Those type of things. And there's been a lot of studies on this. And I'm not sure if you have heard any of this, but leaders are tall and attractive and somewhat more often men, but those are the 3 factors pretty much that you can find. Nothing else correlates, because people naturally, when we're younger and when there's trouble, you look to the tall person because they obviously know what's going on. We like attractive people slightly more, just as an initial bias, and it goes towards men because they're louder. And those are the only real correlations if you go through. Besides that, it's a different leadership style from individual to individual. And it's those different characteristics. So you have your 5 that you use that drive you. Like I said, I don't have my tight 5, but I can guarantee they're going to come out different than yours because we're just different people. We lead differently.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting social study that Professor Torres threw at you. So, that I guess you could go back in, caveman times and historical times, throwing it back and think about that. But it's really an interesting thing. So you think about the days of, hand-to-hand combat, and, the bigger, stronger, smarter person survived more battles, right? Because they were able to, beat up on a smaller, weaker person, swinging a sword, throwing a spear or whatever, and that physical contact. So yeah, that's an interesting concept that I hadn't thought about, as far as as that. And then you also think about, well, as a kid, I mean, I know I've experienced this, and I'm sure a lot of other people have, particularly vets, is, you're in a grocery store in uniform, and a little 3-year-old or 4-year-old runs up and grabs your leg and thinks that you're their dad, and then they look up and see the face. So their initial reaction is like Dr. Torres told you, that tall, and okay, well, yeah, that makes sense.
And I think it's kind of touching on the social side of it. It's one of those interesting self-fulfilling prophecy type situations where, because we naturally go towards attractive, tall, whatever category you want to put it into, those people wind up getting leadership practice when they're younger, because I was a foot taller than everyone, so naturally I'm the person who has to lead the debate in class or something like that comes up. And then because you get that practice when you're younger, you get more confident in leadership, and you wind up becoming that leader that they all thought you were just because they made you do it long enough.
So what you're saying is, your hand in the classroom, your hand was already up above everybody else's just because you sit taller than everybody else, huh?
Exactly. And then you get more practice and you get to get better.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot to be said for that on a number of things, from, you get more practice, so you get better. Uh, that just reminds me of language training, and one of the things that we did, in special forces, as far as language training, if you scored a 3, then which is a really good score, by the way. You
Good to
scored
know.
a 3, then we're going to send you over to Poland for 6 weeks and help you get even better and better. But if you scored just below a 3, you didn't make the cut line, and you get to study on your own to get better. And it's really an ironic thing. It's that, something I used to talk about a lot in the rugby community here in Colorado was the success breeds success.
Yes, sir.
And there is so much truth to that on so many different levels, from your business design, your marketing plan, to individuals getting more opportunities. Because if you're good at something, then somebody throws you more of that thing. If Amazon has become this behemoth of a corporation to where we can buy anything from them, just because we know they have it. I mean, so when you got to buy a microphone for a podcast, you got to buy, a bumper for your truck.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you go? 90% of the people in America go to Amazon. It doesn't matter whether it's a roll of toilet paper or, a notepad. They go to Amazon and they put it in on Amazon, and that's that success breeds success. And it does the same thing for leadership and sports. If you look back at, youth sports, the kids that get the opportunities are the kids that are identified at a very early age that, hey, there's some potential here. And boy, we can get into a whole kind of debate about how that's helped and hurt or hurted. And I believe it's hurting the long-term success of sports in America. But bringing it back into the leadership thing, like you said, you get an early identification of potential because of a physical attribute. Then what does that lead for you in life?
Yes, sir. And so your youth sports comment, it brings to mind a different effect I've heard, and I'm going to call this the January effect. I can't remember the specific name, but it's essentially the idea that youth sports have a cutoff day. And because after this day you play with the younger kids, or before this day you play with the older kids, there's this hard line, and let's call it January, where you have people who are born 2 days apart, but they're playing with younger kids or older kids because of where they were born. I know I have lots of friends that are in this example. So naturally, because you wound up spending really a year longer playing with the younger kids, you're going to be much bigger. you're going to be more athletic, you're going to be more mentally developed, and you're going to be more successful. And so there's this sort of January effect for pro athletes where people clustered around those dates where they're from, because it varies from place to place in different sports. But based on that cutoff date, if you're born just after, just after or just before, wherever it lines up to where you're going to be playing with the younger people, you're going to wind up being more successful. And then that kind of builds on itself to lead to a pro athlete level. So there is really a correlation there. And then another piece on it, we are, as people, we're naturally attracted to success. We all want to be involved in a good thing. You know, if we see something successful, we would love to put our name on it, even if it's just putting our name on it.
Everybody loves a winner.
Exactly. And I think this builds on itself. It's another one of those type effects where we're naturally attracted to success. So you have more people coming in. And when you're successful, you have a positive attitude, and a better attitude, a positive attitude creates better results. And that's one of those things where if you come in and you're positive, it's just like if you're looking for a yellow car, you're going to find a yellow car. If you're looking for a good day, you're going to have a good day, that type of thing. And if you're going in positive and thinking about the success, then you will find that success more and more.
Yep. I call it the red truck principle.
Yes, sir.
You know, just like you said, yellow car, but for me, it's always the red truck. You know, I'll go 10 years without seeing a Ford F-250. And then I bought one 2 years ago. And now every street corner, there's an F-250 sitting on it.
You know, since I took your truck down to Tucson, there's a lot of old Dodge Rams down here.
Oh yeah, I bet there are. They multiplied, didn't they?
Yes, sir.
Well, that is the old truck graveyard is out in the desert. They put the planes out there and the old trucks too. So.
Yes, sir. Let's let them bake away.
Well, coming back to the leadership principles, you know, one of the things that I remember, and I threw this at you many years ago, was leading your peers, and what that's like and how that is. You know, I had opportunities to experience that also in the military, but you know,
you told me, and I know you told my older siblings, Braden and Sierra, as well, the hardest thing you'll ever do in life is lead your peers. I remember it very well.
Oh, yeah. But you know it goes back to the foundation of leadership principles, right? Those things that you have to rely on and believe in and use in order to be successful as a leader.
So we had mentioned a tight five for your foundational principles. Can you go ahead and take us through yours, since I don't have a good one ready for me?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the number one for me is trust in the individual, so that they have integrity and moral courage to do the right thing whenever the opportunity presents itself. And that line has to go back and forth between the leader and the members of the team. And then another one is decisiveness. So when you make a decision, you made a decision. You don't hem-haw and become wishy-washy about it, because when you are wishy-washy about your decision and your path, lack that confidence, which is the next one, lack that confidence in your decision, then your team has less confidence. And wow, well, you know, if Otis didn't feel too comfortable with that, then, you know, how comfortable am I with going forward and doing that? Because now he's showing doubts in his decision. So now I'm showing doubts in my action. And staying with confidence, you know, confidence is about, I've made the best choice that I possibly can with the information and an understanding of the situation at this very moment. And that's what confidence is about, is I've made that best choice. I've decided that that's the truth. That's the best opportunity. And then being a good listener. And the reason being a good listener is a key element of a leader is how else you're going to learn to get better. If you can't hear, if you can't receive feedback from your team members, from other people, whether you're getting a formal 360 feedback or you're just getting input from the team members. You have to be able to take that information in and do something with it and improve yourself. And then my last one, and this one really resonates when you start talking about the foundations and the fundamentals, and it remain the same no matter who you're leading, is communication. And are you a good communicator? Now, this is where, so when people ask me about leading millennials and different social groups, this is the one that I really harp on, because if you're not a great communicator, if you cannot get your message across, your intent, your standards, your guidance, and set that up for the team to perform and for them to understand and digest and utilize it, then how can you ever get across your point? And how can that team ever perform? Because they don't understand what it is you want to do. So if I've got to change my message from a phone call to Snapchat in order to get to the people I'm trying to get the message to perform, then all I'm doing is I'm changing my technique of communication. And as a great leader, you have to know how to communicate with each individual in your organization and in your team so that they can perform at their best and perform within the guidance that you set forth.
So I definitely want to talk more about what you said about confidence, because I think that ties into a lot of what I've had written down. But first, talking about communication and adjusting yourself that way. And this is a term that I'm not sure is 100% accurate, but I'm going to call it micro dialects is the term I'm using. So this is the situation where I talk to you different than I talk to my fiance or to my buddies. And everyone, whether you notice it or not, changes the way they talk like that. It could be things like not swearing as much, using bigger words, anything like that. I know you watch me coach high school rugby versus my little kids for Engage. That is two completely different coaches. And we all naturally do that. And it's those type of things. It's one of those natural behavioral evolutions we have to be more effective and to get along as social creatures.
No, that's so true. And I think I like that terminology, micro dialects. I don't know if we need to put a little trademark stamp on that one. I don't know if any sociologists out there have come up with that one yet, but that is so true in your social circles. I can remember back in the day in the team room, the way we talked in the team room was 100% different than how I talked with, your mom when I got home or anybody else, interacting with anybody else. And an interesting thing, this goes back to that leadership and the self-awareness is knowing that the way I communicated in the team room, I can't use that same style of communication when I go work with a partner nation. One of my peers from Hungary or Poland, I can't communicate, and it's not just a language barrier. It's it's the style of communication that you have to adjust because they're completely different. And this goes back into the even broader subject of understanding who you're talking to and having that awareness, and how do they relate to it, and how do they digest the information. It's the perspectives. That's the word I was looking for. I was trying to come back around to that. Everything you've seen, done, been, felt, and experienced up to this very moment has created the lens that you see everything through right now in life. And how do I, from where I'm sitting, understand where you're sitting and how you see things and accept that?
Yes, sir. And I think I have a good example of that. When I was working with Cobra Valley, I had my sales pitch for my tours all 100% down to get across what my vision was for the company. And what I found I could do is very early on in that conversation, I had this joke I would say, where I would put on my hippie hat, my business hat, and my consumer hat. And I could see which one of those sentences, talking about sustainability, talking about economics, or talking about, consumer health, which one they liked the most. And then that's what I talked about for the rest of the tour. And I kind of gear everything that way. And it's just, like you said, just a way of being an effective communicator, making sure that you're making it so that they are able to identify with what you're talking about.
So how'd you do that? That's a great piece to explore. And I think everybody needs better skills in that area. So how did you read the audience?
So, like I said, I kind of had it as a joke I would set up. So I would be talking about what we're doing as a business, and you tie everything together. And I would say, I'm gonna put my hippie hat on for a moment. When you grow crops locally, you're cutting down on emissions from the trucks, and you can just see people just nodding, smiling, whatever it is. Then I would say, I'll put on my business hat, which I normally wear. Then it's less cost for me because I don't have to pay for a fleet of refrigerated trucks. You can see some people that resonated more, and it's really just facial cues and those type of things, really, I think. And then I'd finish up with saying, but most importantly, that's the fresh product for you. And you could, like I said, it's just a facial cue. You'd see people smile, you kind of see them lean in, or if you're doing a good enough job and you got the right person there, they'll start talking over you. A lot of people I had at that farm for an hour, their tour was, because I never got past my hippie hat, because they were all in on sustainability, and they loved to see a young person that was that fired up about entrepreneurship for sustainability, and that's the future and all those type of things. And they would just get so excited that it's not even necessarily that facial cue. Just like we said, everyone's different. It's just about managing and reading people. You can see that smile, you can hear the change of tone of their voice, of how excited they are, or anything like that. It doesn't, not necessarily going to be them asking questions. You can just pick up on smaller things. And then,
So how did
yes.
I still want to explore that some more, because that's like I said, that's a skill that a lot of people are interested in, whether they're in sales or they're presenting a mission, if you will, to their team, and judging whether or not their team truly understands it. So how did you pick up on that?
So with the team understanding, I think that can be a little bit different, but I think it all ties into just framing and how you ask the questions, how you talk about what you're saying. If you leave it open-ended enough that people can provide their own input, then you don't have to read them as well, if that makes sense. I'll pull a good kind of random example for it. I'm blanking on his name, but one of the TV magicians, or whatever you want to call them, that go in, and the psychics, and they go in and they go out to the crowd and they look around, and you see a older woman crying, and you generically say something about husbands, and she starts telling you, oh, my husband died last week, I just don't know what to do with myself, and she just tells you everything you need to hear right there. And because you framed it that way, that let her fill in the blanks for you. So if you're able to do that, like going back to the team and understanding the problem or the situation that you're dealing with, if you leave it open-ended enough to not, are there any questions, or what, instead of, do you have any questions? What questions do you have? Like those type of little adjustments to where I know you have questions, ask me them. And it kind of changes the framing of the situation that way. Does that answer your question a little bit better?
Yeah, that's great. And that's a great technique. So what you're talking about is shifting. So you've thrown out a blurb to your team that they need to understand in order to perform, right?
Right.
So what you're trying to get back from them is their in-depth understanding, and how they understand what you just said. One of the things that we used to always do in special forces is we did briefbacks. Now, it's a very simple terminology, a briefback, but we took it to the nth level because we would receive a mission, and then we'd get depending on the mission, and this is of course back in the day and different things pre 9/11. This is Cold War stuff we used to do, but we would spend 96 hours on a planning cycle. So we would receive the mission, and we'd get 4 days to do our in-depth planning and we would wrap that in-depth planning up with a brief back to our commander. And what you're talking about in the sense is doing something very similar with your team, whether it's a sports team, business team, or whatever, is here's what I need you to do. Now, tell me what I told you so that I know that you understand it.
Right. I think to tie it to rugby, I know you've done this. I remember I do it a lot, even with my younger kids. So drills that we've done a lot that these kids know and that they, have most of the kids that have been around have done multiple times. I make them explain it to everybody. And one, that gets little kids so excited. They get to go stand next to coach and talk about the drill. And that's always fun. But more so, it makes sure they understand what they're talking about. You realize you don't know all the rules to those games and things like that. You're not the expert you thought you were when you have to try to teach somebody about it. It's that old cliche, the best way to learn is to teach.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and it also puts them, it helps develop those kids because now you're putting them in front of their peers, right? You're putting them in front of their peers, giving them that responsibility to not just regurgitate something that you said, but to use their own language for what you said and what you asked them to do. And that does a couple of things. It also translates. So you have your translator. It's no different than me working with, an Afghan army guy and having a translator right there next to me. It's a similar concept, and you're getting that kid to explain in his language that his buddies, his peers relate to, and then they're going to understand it at a different level than if you, the coach, explains it to them. And it's a great technique to do. And it kind of goes back to that whole brief back principle, right?
Definitely. So I want to kind of steer us back to something I had written down so we make sure we don't forget it. Going back to confidence a little bit more. So you talked about how a leader being confident inspires confidence in the team, and that can lead you to be successful. That was one of your core principles you talked about.
Yeah.
So I think something for that I've noticed is, having that another word for it would be the conviction. You are so sure about your success. You're so sure about your mission, what you're going to do, your plan, and that inspires confidence in the rest of your team. You talked about how confidence and situational. So a lot of things I talk about, I think you can boil it down to situationalism and incentives. People respond in the situation they're in. There's a management fallacy, really, that people are judged on in hindsight. So if I came to you with a project and right now it looked like a pretty darn good project and it just fails miserably and you fire me in 6 months, that's just it's a fallacy on your part. There's no logic there because you saw the information I laid out in front of you 6 months prior and it made sense then. That's something that I'm wanting to do with opportunities, and it's all about framing. You change the incentives around. You should be encouraging people to take calculated risks. You expand this out into, sorry to get into stats a little bit more. I know it'll bore some people, but you expand that out to the probability. You have some certain, let's call it 50% chance that this project is successful and it will make $1 million. So you calculate that out, that project's worth $500,000, right? At 50% success rate. Then if you are happy with that 500,000 at that time, then there is no reason that later on when it fails, that person should be judged for suggesting that project. Because when you calculate out the risk, it makes sense. If you don't do that, and studies have shown that management makes poor decisions because they become too risk adverse. They're not willing to calculate out and say, hey, this is a 50-50 chance, but it could be big. Or, hey, this is worth, has a small % chance of being successful, but it can bring in so much money that it's worth it. Or, it has a small % chance of failing, but it's a smaller income, those type of things, and being able to judge it in the moment. And then making sure that you're not judging, your team or your employees based on hindsight. Hindsight's 20/20. There's a reason we always say that, because it's really easy to go years from now and talk about how stupid that decision was. But the fact is, at that time, with the information that was available to your team and to the experts on your team, you made this decision, and you stand by that, and you have that confidence. And if you have that unwavering confidence, I think your team will stand behind you.
No, that's great. And you know what it also reminds me of is the whole the failure fallacy, or the acceptance of failure. You know, because if you look at failure as an opportunity, it's just another opportunity to learn and another iteration to go. You know, I think I can't remember if it was Edison or Franklin, but you know, one of the great American inventors, you know, talks about you know, how many I failed 100 times before I got it right once, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you know, you correlate that to the, hey, I found my keys, and guess what? Guess where they were? They were in the last place I looked. Ha! Why were they in the last place you looked? Well, because I found them, right? You know, it's the thing about failure. You know, it's 100 failures and one success. You know, you got it right one time. Well, guess what? You got it right one time. How many other times do you have to get it right? If you got it right that one time, if you made that iPod right that one time, how many other times do you have to make it the next time? Well, probably none, because you know, I failed 100 times and I got it right one time, and then I made an awesome product that exploded on the market. So
I think being able to recognize your failures as opportunities is a big step towards being successful in life in general. You know, even I'd take this a step further. I know I'm working on this as best I can. Luckily, I've been successful recently, but you should celebrate failures. I've read studies about this of management groups who it's like, hey, you know, we just, you know, our sales came in 50% less than it was supposed to be. Like, let's throw a freaking party because we messed up. We need to make adjustments, but now we know. And, you know, taking that positive attitude of, you know, at the time we made the decision, let's make our decision now, celebrate that chapter and move forward.
yeah, well, I can tell you, I don't know if I'd be celebrating you missing your mark by 50% if you were my sales guy. I can tell you that right now.
Might
But
not have been the best example.
yeah, believe me, I ain't throwing no party for you if you missed your mark by 50%. But the point, your point is well taken. You know, it is, how do I improve, and what? All right, that was a great iteration. We've learned some things. We did some things right. We did some things wrong. How can we adjust? What do we need to shift on to do it differently next time, so that we get closer to our mark and closer to our objective going forward? And you know, that's the leader's job, is to set that culture. And I think we can continue on with that discussion for many iterations. But you know,
I'll try to tie it back in to the core.
yeah, please.
So I think, like, when I think about leadership and, you know, human behavior, really, it's all about incentives. And if you are incentivizing that failure to where there's not a fear of failure, you're getting rid of that fear or that stigma. You you're able to be more successful because you're focusing positively. Like we talked about how success breeds success.
Mm-hmm.
If you're scared of failure, all you're thinking about is failure, you will fail. I joke about this a lot. It's not quite all the way true, but I never plan for failures, because that means you're accepting it as an option, right? You know, that's the polar end of it, but it's true. If you are going into, I'm trying to think of a good example, but if you're going into a situation, you're planning for when the worst thing happens, you're accepting that worst thing will happen. Now, of course, you do want to have your contingency plans so that you can handle risk, but there's a little bit to be said of that. If you're only thinking about the positive outcome, if you're visualizing it positively, then you are going to have a positive outcome. Not always perfect like that, but that's I think that's a good mental process to put yourself in.
Yeah, it is. That's a great way to look at it. And you know, I think you can look at things, you know, if you set your outcome and your expectations and you perform in the moment, so not worrying about what the outcome is, because if you worry about the outcome, then you're worried about the end state, and you never get done what you need to get done at this very moment. And that's what a lot of people jump to. But if you set that expectation and you create the path to and up the path of performance to get there and get the outcome that you want, then you're much more likely to succeed. And it's that, and you have that confidence and fearlessness. You operate fearlessly in going forward, meaning that you're not concerned what the outcome is because you know it will be positive. And you know, even if your objective is 10 and you get 8, okay, but that's still, even if you just get 1 or you get 0, but you look at the opportunity to succeed as that opportunity, then you can put yourself into a mindset of positive iterations.
Right.
Make those incremental changes to what you do and how you do things so that eventually you create the process and the path to have that outcome that you desire.
Right. And I think, like we talked about, leadership is leadership. You can apply this to just about anything. All leadership is just dealing with people. So I have a good story on this, and it ties into a little bit of your story, actually. So it would have been my sophomore year here at U of A. I had a management class, and it was mandatory attendance. I was in there, 2 times a week, but I could not even get myself to pay attention because I just thought it was the most boring thing ever. And I was getting hundreds on every single test. And because it's just easy to me. I didn't get why we were even talking about this. And then I talked with my friend one day, and he's like, gosh, I am struggling. How do you get this? And it kind of clicked. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm good at this. That's something I'm naturally good at is, the management. And I kind of stepped back and thought about how, you had taught me so much about leadership in rugby, especially, coaching and then being a captain, those type of things. And you just apply those concepts to management. It's really the same thing. And then it was at that moment that I realized how your career arc makes so much sense. I never understood why you would be in, special forces for 25 years and then go be a rugby coach and a performance business coach. Like you were, doing all these amazing, crazy things. Why would you just go talk to people? But really, all you were doing, and I don't mean to make it sound bad, not all you were doing, but
Yeah,
it was managing.
All I used to do in the Army was talk to people.
Oh, yeah, you just told them what to do. That's it, right? But, I mean, you were communicating. There's a lot of other tasks and things you have to do, just like when you're playing rugby, just like when you're in business. There's other pieces of it, but the overarching theme is just that communication. People, even animals really for that matter, people make decisions based on the situation they are in and the incentives involved in that situation. So like as a leader, if you can communicate well and you can hack those situations with proper incentives, you can get people to accomplish your goals. People make poor choices because of negative or misaligned incentives, I'd say. And if you're able to make it so that people have those positive incentives to where they want to be, working for you, working towards that end goal, you don't give them the option to mess it up because they're never even looking at that because the situation they're in is just positive.
That's great. And it falls back to the leader, right? It falls back to the leader to set that culture and create those opportunities for the people on the team to do what they want to do and have them nest what they want to do into what the team is there to do and what the team was created to do. And that's what leadership is about, and getting people to do those things. And quite frankly, having them, they like doing it because they want to be a part of that organization and of that success. So
I have a good bit for that. So it's something that I can't say I'm going to do with Aquatunities because it would lose me a lot of money right now. But the idea is that you can have to build in an incentive to make sure that people want to be there and they want to be a part of the team. What a handful of companies have done is they'll pay you to quit. So some of them do it during training and it's a smaller amount. I've heard of companies that have standing offers of, if you quit, I will give you 3 months pay. And there are lines of people wanting to work for that company because that means that in addition to your, what you're getting out of your job, your normal income, to quit and go do something else. But, so in addition to the opportunity cost of doing something else, if you weren't working there, they're also going to give you 3 months pay. man, I would quit my job right away, except you love your job so much that you're willing to stay there. You're willing to give up that opportunity cost. You're willing to give up that, 3 months worth of pay that you would have gotten in one check just for walking out that door.
Yeah. Dave Ramsey's company, Ramsey Solutions, is one of those companies that does that. And, that says a lot about the culture that's been created. And it also sets the tone that the leadership in that organization is truly bought into the culture, and not just bought into the culture. They live it and they believe it and they want to protect it. And that right there shows a lot of desire and careful molding of the culture and protection of the culture from a very, sitting around a kitchen table to a large corporation of nearly 1,000 people. And how do you retain that? And I think that's something that, we can talk about on another show, because there's another hour plus of talking about how you create that culture and how do you sustain it.
Easily an hour at least.
Yeah. So what'd you learn today? What'd you learn today in today's show?
So what did I learn from you, or what was I teaching?
No, what'd you learn? I mean, as we were talking.
So, I think, I definitely learned that I need to get my, think about it more critically and get my 5 foundational principles of leadership. I have some bouncing around in my head, but having that and making sure you're building that into your company culture from the beginning, I think is a big piece of it. I think that really, I mean, I learned quite a bit about how leadership is leadership, really. There's as we talk, they're just finding more and more correlations between different things. I mentioned something from a behavioral economics book I read, and you can immediately tie it to your work in the Army and those type of things. It's so easy. It's organic to flow across the different barriers if you really think about it. And that if you broaden your horizon into the different leadership categories, you can be more successful. Because to take another point on that, I think it's because you can have different themes that you can apply. So I remember I came to you a year or two ago and asked for some military leadership books, because I knew that's what I didn't have. I've coached, I've played rugby, I've taken management classes, but I've never led a platoon or anything like that. I never led soldiers on a mission. And I knew that there were things that I could learn from those leaders that I could then apply into rugby. You could apply it into business and those type of things.
That's great. Thanks for summarizing that. And I tell you, well, I learned that you actually did go to some of your classes, so that was great to hear.
Just a handful.
Yeah, just a handful. Well, at least some of them. That's good to hear, and that you got good grades in those classes that you went to too. But it's how we communicate is such a critical piece, and I think you just hammered that home for me. And from your experiences, with your little kid rugby to your startup business, and how important it is to, as the leader, to have that communications channel, and whatever the means is to communicate with your team, whatever tools you use or process or language. I think that's that just hammered that home of how important that is. And yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. And,
of course. So did you learn anything else?
No, I think that was the big piece. I mean, the economic aspect of how you've got this scientific approach from things that I've learned through the art approach of doing is kind of a neat corollary. It's a data validation.
Right. And I make this joke quite a bit, because I have to laugh at my boring, nerdy self sometimes. Is I'll read a chapter in one of my books, and I'll go to my fiance and I'll be so excited. And I'm like, hey, babe, guess what I just read? Did you know that people make decisions in stores where they want to maximize the happiness they get out of that decision? She's like, well, yeah, you do what makes you happy. And I go, yeah, but this guy proved it. And, stupid little things like that, where you can mathematically prove human behavior certain ways. that you've already picked up on, but I can sometimes put a number to it.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. All right. Well, I think that wraps up our show for today. And if you want to find us, you can find me, Otis, on Instagram at LTO_enterprises, and also on Facebook.
And if you want to get in contact with me, you can find Aquatunities on Facebook and Instagram, and also at aquatunities.com.
All right. Thanks.